let's begin by praying that the fruits of our learning should be to helping the release of the hostages and protecting our soldiers, protecting Am Yisrael and all of the innocents, bringing an end to this war.
Amen.
And with that, we will begin. So this is just a follow-up from some of the things we discussed last time, and I will take a little bit of time on this because it is such a basic and important concept. So here, the Gemara in Megillah brings a number of ma'amarim of Rabbi Chia bar Abba in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and this is the last one it brings in the series. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mai dichtiv, why is it written, V'leihem kechol hadvarim asher diber Hashem imachem bahar? Why does it say, and on them, like all of the things or all of the words that God spoke with you on the mountain? Melamed, it teaches, Sheharal Kadosh Baruch Hu Moshe diktukei Torah, v'diktukei sofrim, Masha sofrim atidin lechadesh, Mai nihu, Mikra Megillah. So it teaches you that Kadosh Baruch Hu showed Moshe the diktukei Torah, the particulars, the finer points of Torah, the diktukei sofrim. We'll talk about that in a second. Masha sofrim atidin lechadesh, and that which the sofrim are to either innovate or renew in the future. And what are they? The reading of the Megillah. So let's break this down a little bit. So the main point we understand comes across from this is this idea that in some sense, Moshe Rabbeinu, when he received the Torah, he received all aspects of the Torah. One second. The pasuk, to see which. Hold on a second. I have a bunch of different windows open here, and I have to get to the right window. But this is the right one, and I will transfer you all to that window. So what's the pasuk that's being quoted in this drasha? It's from here. It's the end of Parshat Mishpatim. We read it not that long ago. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. No, it's not that pasuk. I brought that for a different reason. Hold on a second. It's this pasuk. Vayitain Hashem elai. So this is Moshe Rabbeinu in Parshas Ekev, and he's recounting how he got the Aseret HaDibrot. And he says, Hashem gave to me 2 tablets of stone, Ktuvim be'etz be'elokim, that were written with the finger of God. Va'aleihem, on them, Kechol hadvarim asher diber Hashem imachem bahar mitoch ha'esh b'yom ha'kahal. Like all of the things or all of the words that God spoke with you on the mountain from amidst the fire on the day of the congregation. Okay. So what's the drasha? The drasha is what we just saw. And it's repeated here in the Torah Tanima on that pasuk. So let's break it down. So what does it mean that what is it telling us? It tells us that Kadosh Baruch Hu showed Moshe all of these particulars, the particulars of the Torah, the particulars of the Sofrim. So first of all, who are the Sofrim? What are Dikduke Sofrim? Does anybody know?
Chazal.
Yeah, it's Chazal. This term Sofrim, it's a very early term that goes back already to the beginning of Beit Sheni. Among other sources we have that Ezra is called a Sofer, and the way he's referred to is um, not just Sofer like the way I'm a Sofer, but that he was Sofer, that he counted things. So there's this idea early on that Sofrim with the Chachamim that maintain the integrity of the Torah by counting things. So among the things that they counted were all of the words and letters in Psukim and Tanakh. And that was a way of maintaining integrity, that as the texts get copied and you check them, one way to check to make sure that they were copied correctly is you count all the letters and you count all the words. And then if there's a deviation, you know that there's a mistake. And that expands into what we know largely as the Masorah, where the Masorah takes account of those things as well as particular grammatical forms of words that appear, how many times they appear, and so forth. And it's also that they counted up things as a mnemonic, like in the Mishnah, we have many counts that we use for mnemonics, like Arba Avot Mizikin, right? There are four major categories of damages, and there are Lamed Tet Melachot, there are 39 Melachot. So what's the idea of giving the number? Because you don't have to give the number, you could just say what they are. But by giving the number, it's a mnemonic, it's a way of remembering. It's like Lahavdil Elef Havdalot. When I go to the shuk for my to buy my shopping, I'll write a list, but I'll count the number of things. And then if I somehow forget the list, in my head I know I have to get whatever, 6 things. And then I'll go through and it helps me to remember. So in a similar way, hopefully.
So would the Taryag fall under this?
Yes, you could also argue, it's interesting, Taryag Mitzvot, yeah, you could say Taryag Mitzvot, and also that it was divided to 248 and 365, and those are related to the days of the solar year and the number of limbs in a man's body, and so forth. Yeah, these are all different mnemonics. I have another whole shir to give about Taryag Mitzvot, but that's a different story. But yeah, in principle, yeah, this kind of counting is there to help us. So the Dikdukei Sofrim are understood to be the halachot that were specified by the Sofrim. That is what we refer to largely as mitzvot d'Rabbanan, would be under the Dikdukei Sofrim, because they wrote in Takanot and so forth. 1 second, I just want to turn off my phone. And it says, Umasha Sofrim Atidim Lechadesh. Even the things that Sofrim in the future would innovate. And what are they? The reading of the Megillah. So the reading of the Megillah, right? So reading of Megillah, of course, is not something that is anywhere specified in the Torah. And logically, it wouldn't be, because the story of Esther comes long after Matan Torah. And yet, the Gemara earlier in Masechet Megillah talks about how the writing of the Megillah came about, that is, that it became part of Kitvei Kodesh, and what its status is, and so forth. And that's another whole shir, which now that we're approaching Purim, maybe before Purim, I'll give a little shir about that since we touched on it today. Here, the Torah Tanima himself talks about this drasha. This is the way he understands it. So he says, first of all, lo rak mikra Megillah. It doesn't mean only mikra Megillah. Ela kol ha-mitzvot d'Rabbanan. All the mitzvahs d'Rabbanan. By the way, the other thing I'll just point out about Divrei Sofrim, there's more to say about this that I'm going to try to get into this evening. But there's the way the Rambam uses the term Divrei Sofrim is not necessary. It could be more expansive than this in some ways. And the Rambam, particularly in the beginning of Hilchot Ishut, but I'm just making that as a mental note. But we're not going to get into it. Let's say just for now, as the Torah Tamina is saying, that what the drasha here is referring to is that all of the mitzvot Rabbanan were part of what was given to Moshe Rabbeinu. But Tafas Inyan Mikra Megillah, so why did it particularly go out of its way to mention Mikra Megillah? It shows that Mishum Ayri Ba Be'inyan Masechet too, because that's what it's talking about here in Masechet Megillah. But it's just an example. וכלל ביאור כוונת הדרשה הזאת נראה שהורה אותו דרכי הדרשות ומעמידות שתפסו חז"ל לדרוש בהם דברי התורה ולפרשה ולבארה. So basically the idea of this drasha, it seems to be that it's just teaching us that using the methods of drash that Chazal used to darshan the words of the Torah and to explain it, to comment on it, to explain it, and then to draw out from that laws and it's another word for this, chidushim. 1 second. It'll come to me. Anyway, as it were, new things.
Is that you mean, I guess maybe innovations versus renovations?
No, not either of those. But thank you for trying. 1 second. It'll come to me. It's a different word. Just like they were somech, that is, that they pinned, as it were, all the mitzvot Rabbanan on the pasuk in Parshat Shoftim, lo tasur, and that's something that we've talked about. The meaning, what he's saying here is that Chazal elsewhere, we saw this in the Gemara in Shabbos in the sugya about Chanukah. Is one of the places where Chazal say that the mitzvah of Hanukkah, how is it that we can say the blessing on lighting candles, where it says Asher kichanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, because Hechan Sivanu, where were we commanded to light candles? So, because I'll say we're commanded from the pasuk of Lo Tasur. You're not allowed to deviate from the laws of the Rabbanan, is the way Chazal understood that pasuk. So that's also another source for this idea. Oh, and actually, I see in brackets, he points to that Gemara, Ayin Shabbat Chat Gimel Amidal. Well, if he's according to this, Yesh Bichal Yisod, the Chol HaMitzvot Rabbanan b'Torah. This is now a foundation for all of the mitzvot Rabbanan in the Torah. V'chein Ma she'asru Chazal Shniyot La'arayot, Al Pi Yisod HaDrasha Ushmartem et mishmarti, asay mishmeret mishmeret. The idea that Chazal created this category of seconds in forbidden sexual relations, right? The Torah forbids, there's a list of forbidden sexual relations, and Chazal expanded on that. This at the beginning of Yevamot, it lists all of them. And that was based on a pasuk that they darshan where it says Ishmartem et Mishmarti. You have to guard my guarding. And the drasha is a say mishmeret mishmeret. You have to make a guarding for the guarding. Whereas the Torah itself is a mishmeret, and you have to make a mishmeret to the mishmeret. K'muvar l'fanenu sof parshat acharei. Like it's explained to us at the end of Parshas Acharei Mas. Harei degam l'gzerot d'Rabanan. So the point is that even Gzerot Rabbanan, yesh lahem yisod b'Torah. They have a foundation in the Torah. V'dok v'timtzah kal. You look carefully and you'll see this is easy. V'bichlal drasha zu. Yerchavnu abeyor b'sof parshat mishpatim. The pasuk v'ten alecha et haTorah v'mitzvah yain sham. So he refers you to what he says toward the end of Parshat Mishpatim, and that's this other pasuk, which is from that I mistakenly started with, where it says Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. So this is at the end of Parshat Mishpatim. Hashem invites Moshe up to the Har, and where he begins his 40-day stay on Har Sinai, and we understand that he goes up to heaven and so forth to get the Torah. And this is the pasuk where it says, "Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, alei elai hahara," go up to me on the mountain. Ve'yesham, and be there. Ve'etna lecha et luchot ha'eben, I will give you the tablets of stone. Ve'ha-Torah, ve'ha-mitzvah, and the Torah and the mitzvah, that asher katavti laharotam, that I have written to teach them. So what do we got out of this? So here, second, the Tenelecha. So here, there's a Gemara that we learned a long time ago in the beginning of Brachot. The Tenelecha Amar Bishimon ben Lakish. Bishimon ben Lakish said, "My dichtiv v'tenelecha et luchotai ben Torah b'mitzvah shekatavti orotam." So what does this mean? What does this pasuk mean? So he breaks it down. Luchot elu aser hadibrot. So the tablets, that's the 10 commandments. That's the Decalogue, 10 sayings. Torah is mikra. Torah is the mikra, which should be the entirety of the Torah, the Chamisha Chumshei Torah. V'ha-mitzvah, what does that include? Zu Mishnah. Asher katavti elu neviim uktuvim. That's prophets and writings. Laharotam, to teach them. Ze Gemara, that's the Gemara. Milamed shekulam nitnu leMoshe b'Sinai. It teaches you that all of these were given to Moshe at Sinai. So again, it's another iteration of this basic concept that Moshe received everything at Sinai. What the Torah Tamima wants us to understand, and which would seem to be the simple understanding of these Gemaras, is it doesn't mean that that Moshe had the whole library of the Vilna Shas and all the Chidushim and all of that, but rather what it means is that, in other words, if you would ask Moshe what did the Rambam say about such and such, it's not that he would tell you what the Rambam said about such and such. But what it means is that he received in principle, everything that makes up the Torah, all of the foundations of the Torah.
So this
So
actually reminds me of the famous Agadah of Moshe being sent to sit in the last row of the yeshiva of Rabbi Akiva.
yeah, which I think I mentioned last week.
We did.
Two-
Okay, now I
No,
forgot.
no, that's it. No, it's fine if you remember. It's fine. What was the occasion where he was sent to sit? What says in the eighth row? Doesn't say the last row.
Okay. A ways back.
What
One of the occasions he asked is when Hakadosh Baruch Hu is writing the luchot on them, writing the luchot, and Moshe asking him, well, why are you putting all the coat seam on? And or and then Moshe, and then Hakadosh Baruch Hu answers, because there'll be somebody who will innovate heaps and heaps of laws based on this.
the he'll darsh, it says
Darshan, okay.
he will learn heaps and heaps of halachot. Yes, when Moshe went up to the heavens to receive the Torah, he saw Kadosh Baruch Hu sitting and tying the crowns onto the letters. And yes, and then so that's going to come up again today, because I want to read you what the Torah Tanima has to say about the drasha over here. But before we do that, I'm going to click back to the previous pasuk. So, question is, this is all very nice. This is all a very nice drasha that we started with from the Gemara and Megillah, right? The Gemara and Megillah was, this is just, Surat Adaf. This is the way it looks on a printed page. Amar B'chia Barabba, Rabbi Yochanan, my dichtiv, v'aleihem kechol hadvarim asher tiber Hashem imachem, bahar. So it teaches you that pasuk, right? This pasuk in Dvarim, where Hashem says, Hashem gave me the luchot, and on them, kichol hadvarim asher diber Hashem imachem, like all of the things that God spoke with them, or with you on the mountain. So where do I see from this pasuk that God gave him anything more than just the luchot themselves? In other words, the drasha is that not only did he get the luchot, but he got the whole rest of Torah for all time. So where do I see that? So it must be from something with these words here, kechol hadvarim, like all of the things. I'll just point out here the Maharsha. The Maharsha, in his explanation of this drasha in Megillah, this is what he says. He says, like Michael Warner says, Mitura de kechol. It's from the extra word kechol, he takes it out, he draws it out. The Havamati lemichtav v'aleihem advarim asher diber. The pasuk didn't need this word kechol. You could have just written, it could have written v'aleihem hadvarim. On them, on the luchot, were the things that God spoke. So why does it say kichol, like all? So that adds something. Lekach darshu meribui dechol diktukei Torah v'sofrim umitur dikatav hadimayon darshu gam mashatir lehitchadesh umitur dekaf hadimayon. So in other words, there's two yiturim. Yitur is like a ribui, it's something extra, right? From yeter. So the drasha is that first of all it says kol, So that includes all Dikdukei Torah B'Sofrim. And from the Kichel, which is the Kafa Dimayon, the Kaf of comparison, Darshu Gam Mashati Lihitchadesh. That adds in also not just those things which are, as it were, already embedded in the Torah in a more obvious way, but even the things that will be as it were, made new in the future. Wait a second. The word just popped into my head again. Ugh, it popped out. I can't think. All right, it doesn't matter. Dahainu, and Dahainu, right? And what is that? Mikra Megillah, Timidameh la legufa shel Torah. It's now comparing Megillah. In other words, all the laws of Megillah, reading the Megillah and everything about the Megillah, this is now being compared to the body of the Torah itself, and it's to the basic Torah itself. Kedamim Perakama, like we say in the first chapter of here in Masechet Megillah, Shalom ve'emet. That's right toward the end of the Megillah. It says Divrei Shalom ve'emet, and the Gemara Darshans Ke'amita shel Torah. These words of the Megillah are like the truth of the Torah. There's a lot of interesting things about Megillah in particular, where it's compared to the Torah, and I may have pointed this out a long, long time ago, but when you learn Masechet Megillah, one of the things that you will find that is unique to Megillah is, even though in general we don't learn halachot out from Nevi'im and Ketuvim, the exception is Megillah, where Chazal darshan the Megillah the way they darshan Torah. It's treated in the same way. We learn out all these different halachot about Kriyat Megillah and Matanot Avyonim and Mishloach Manot and all of these things we learn out by darsh. And when we read the Megillah, right, all the different zmanim, it's the very first drasha in the beginning of the Masechet. It's darshaned like the Torah itself. Okay, so that's the first drasha. And now let's flip over to the second drasha, and I'll relate to you here what the Torah Tamima has to say about that, which is quite interesting. So here, right, so this is the pasuk that he referred us back to, right, in the end of Mishpatim, based on the drasha in Megillah. And now here he starts off by saying, Ayin b'Megillah Yutet Amud Bet, right? So he starts off by referring you back to this Gemara in Megillah. Ita binyan ze b'smichut al pasuk acher melamed shehara al kadosh baruch hu dikdukei Torah v'dikdukei sofrim. That over there, the Gemara brings this pasuk from Dvarim, and it relates it to the pasuk over there to teach us that the Kadosh Baruch Hu showed Moshe. It's interesting, lashon sheherau. He showed Moshe, right? The dikdukei Torah, the dikdukei sofrim, masha sofrim atidim lechadesh. Novelay. That's the word I'm looking for. Novelay. That's the way. That's the fancy way of saying chidushim. Like the Chidushay of the Ramban are called the Navalei of the Ramban. Finally. Wow. Right. So now he brings some other related drashot. Uviyushalmi Pei Perek Bet Halacha Dalad, Megillah Perek Dalad Halacha Hey. And those two places, Miyushalmi Ita Halashon, it has this language, Afilu Masha Talmid Vatik Atid Lahorot, even what a senior, a seasoned student in the future will teach, the Fnei Rabo will teach in front of his master. Kfar Ne'amar Moshe Sinai. That it was already said to Moshe at Sinai. that particular line about Talmid Vatik, that was the line that I was specifically trying to remember the source for. So it comes about through this. Va'avkia nuschaot shanot, even though they're different nuschaot, there's shonot zemiza, right? They're different from one another. Aval kavanah achat lekulan. They all have the same intent. V'hu shekol yikarei halachot shetidim hatalmidim lechadesh mikoach pilpulam. All of the halachot that students in the future will be mechadesh based on their sharp discussion, ramazim, and from allusions with the Yukim, and by looking closely at the text in the Torah, Hakol haya ratzuf b'muvan haTorah mitchilata. This was all laid out in the understanding of the Torah from the very beginning. And here's where he wants to make an important point about ein hakavana. The intent is not that to gufei hapilpulim mamash shatidim hitchadesh ne'amru Moshe. Doesn't mean that every actual discussion that took place between Talmidim was revealed to Moshe. Kasher ratzu tzarei ayin al haTalmud la'amis kavanazu b'divrei hadrashot, as some miserly people, in other words, people who want, he means in this context, people who want to limit really the understanding of the Gemara to la'amis, like to heap on this intent in the words of these drashot that we brought. Mitoch kach herimu ze ha'ma'amar al nes, and because of their understanding, they hoisted this saying of Chazal up on the flagpole. Matsu makom notzi pachsutar mal haTalmud b'lahag arbe yigiat basar v'ruach lomar ki ledat haTalmud ledatam kol pilpul v'shakla v'tar yeshatid kol talmid lechadesh hakol ne'amar l'Moshe b'Sinai. In other words, these people are going like way overboard and saying like every single word of every single back and forth and discussion between Talmidim was revealed to Moshe at Sinai. The Afal yeah, and he's using kind of exaggerated derogatory language when he's speaking about that. ואף כי האמת עד לעצמה אמיתת הכוונה היא שרק עיקרי ההלכות והדינים שעתידים לעלות בכל דור הם נאמרו למשה, ולא גוף הפלפולים. Says the truth is that what the real intent of this drasha and all of these drashot is just that that in the future, all of the halachot and that will come out in the future in every generation, those were given to Moshe at Sinai. But not all of the pilpul, not all of the discussions and arguments. You don't really need proofs for this, but nonetheless, but there seems to be here a faithful source to prove his point. That this is in fact the intent of the Chachmei Talmud. And it's from the story that Michael Werner had referenced just a few moments ago. From the Gemara in Menachot, Haftar Amud Bet, Shetzayiru Sham et Gedulat Rabbi Akiva b'tziur kazeh, that they painted, as it were, the greatness of Rabbi Akiva in this form, in this image, that Kishala Moshe Lamaro, when Moshe went up on high to get the Torah, Herulo Hachachamim shebachol dor, and they showed him, Hashem showed him the Chachamim of each generation. Ra'ad Rabbi Akiva, he saw Rabbi Akiva doresh kol kots v'kots, that Rabbi Akiva darshan from every thorn, each and every thorn, tilei tilim shahalachot b'pilpul. That's, he's adding in the word b'pilpul, but it's a way of understanding the story there. that Rabbi Akiva, using his own method of dialectic and argument, he was able to darshan out of each quotes piles and piles of halachot. Moshe didn't know what they were. Tashash kochosha Moshe. So what did the story say there? Moshe sees this, and his strength is weakened. Kevan shehigia Rabbi Akiva l'davar echad, and when Rabbi Akiva came to one thing, Amru lo talmidav, Rabbi Akiva's students, his students said to Rabbi Akiva, Zeh minayin lach, where do you get this from? What's your source for what you're saying? Amar lehu, zu halacha l'Moshe miSinai. What I'm telling you is halacha l'Moshe miSinai. And the story says, V'nityashva dato shel Moshe. And then Moshe's mind was put at rest. Now, the way I'll just put in here, the way Rashi explains that is very simple. That if we bear in mind the context of the way the story is given, this story happens when Moshe first goes up to get the Torah, meaning he has not yet received the Torah. So when Rabbi Akiva says, Halacha l'Moshe miSinai, why is his mind put at ease? Because he knows he's going to go back to Sinai and God is going to give him the Torah, and then he'll understand everything. But we can say a little bit more about it. And this is what he wants to say. Harei mevuar mefurash. So here it's explained explicitly, Shekach hevinu Chazal midrasha lefanenu. In other words, this is a proof for how Chazal understood the drasha that's in front of us, that what halachot hakvuot ne'amru Moshe, that the fixed halachot were given to Moshe. The way he's understanding the story is, why was Moshe mityashva dato? Because he knows that he's going to get the halachot that were darshaned out. Ela halachot shelo yachlu achachamim lotzi rak mikol hapilpul b'asvara. These are the halachot that chachamim were not able to extract except through the power of argument and reason. And that's why Moshe's mind was put at ease, because that's why his mind was put at ease when Rabbi Akiva said, this is halacha Moshe miSinai. Dizu ma'ala gdola mipilpul. He's making a new point here. He's saying that when Moshe finds out that this is halacha l'Moshe miSinai, that what is halacha l'Moshe miSinai? That these halachot that Rabbi Akiva darshaned out are halacha l'Moshe miSinai. So he doesn't have to now anymore worry about whether or not he follows the arguments or the reasoning of Rabbi Akiva, because this is a higher level, this is a greater level than pilpul, than this kind of argumentation. Pilpul bifnei halacha kvua al pi hakabbalah hu be'erech prosdor l'traklin. The pilpul in the face of fixed halacha that we get by way of tradition, it has the value of the anteroom that leads into the palace. Klomar, what does it mean? You can't go inside. What does it mean to go into the palace? To go into the palace, the analogy is that going into the palace is when you conclude what halacha is. So you can only go into the palace by going through the prosdor. So if the prosdor is the pilpul, it's simply a necessary component. It's a necessary step that you need to go through in order to get to the palace, in order to get to the halacha. So the only way you can go in is through pilpul, through this kind of argumentation. Okay, so we get, in other words, the metaphor is that the prosdor is the pilpul, the palace is the halacha. So he's saying, he's starting off with this idea, which is actually more important, the prosdor or the traklin? So obviously the traklin, anybody who's going through the prosdor is only going through the prosdor to get to the traklin. Anybody who's doing pilpul is only doing it to arrive at a halachic conclusion. And in the story, since Rabbi Akiva, when he was challenged by one of his students, he couldn't find this halacha, mikocha pilpul v'asvara, he wasn't able to prove it by using his argumentation or his reasoning, uchrach lomar, so then he was forced to say, shekachi halacha l'Moshe miSinai. So rather, he said in that instance, it was halacha l'Moshe miSinai. And then he gives other references in this regard. Yotem is a reference to the Medrash Rabbah in Hukat, which I looked there, and I'm not sure actually which reference he was referring to there. I need some more yun on my part. Yoter mizeh mevuar mefurash perusha inyan kama shekatav b'Medrash Rabbah Parshat Tisa, our Parshas Kisisa, Perek Mem Aleph, b'Pasuk Vayitena Moshe b'Zeh Lashon. So there's a drasha in Kitisa where it says Vayitena Moshe. What it says like as follows: L'chikol Torah lamod Moshe l'arba'im yom. Did Moshe learn the entire Torah in 40 days? Aktiv aruka me'eretz midah. It's longer than the measure of the universe. Ella, so what did he learn in 40 days? You can't possibly have learned all of the Torah in 40 days. It's essentially infinite. Ella chalim namduhu HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kadosh Baruch Hu taught him general principles. Adkan. These things don't need explanation. I could go more at length of this. But here it's enough what we've written. And I can say, because we spent a lot of time last week, and even I, mamash katan shebiktanim, I could also go on. There are other references that talk about this, but I find it a really fascinating concept. And maybe just to wrap this up as a topic for now, just to say that it's this very concept that on the one hand, everything was given to Moshe at Sinai, but what that means is that the implication of these drashot that we're looking at is that things will be revealed over time in different generations. So part of our motivation, or maybe a big part of our motivation for learning Torah, is we are looking for new interpretations with confidence in the idea that our so-called novel interpretations, our new interpretations, are really things that are embedded in the text. They're embedded already in there, but it's up to us to pull them out. So I would say, lahavdil, but along the same lines, Michael Werner might also speak to this, because this is something you see in other things as well, in other literature. I'd say particularly poetry. Michael, you can say how you feel about your poetry. Like once you put it out in the world, people will make of it what they will, and they'll see things that you didn't see. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I've heard many writers speak in this way. So I would say, alachat kama v'chama, that the Torah has within it these kind of infinite, expansion, which is the understanding of the Torah in any given generation. And as I mentioned at the end of last week's shir, also in any given individual, how we understand it.
I would
But
maybe qualify that and say not infinite, but not an infinity, but a multiplicity?
I think, well, I'm talking about Torah being infinite, and why would
Okay,
you,
fine.
not about necessarily poetry. Poetry might be more limited,
But
but
even with Torah, I mean, there are readings that are wrong.
no, so yeah, that, so it doesn't mean, that's important for you to point out. So there's a concept in Chazal of mareh panim shelo kahalacha, like your ways of reading the Torah that are not according to halacha, meaning that they've gone outside the bounds of Torah. So, for example, just to quote an example from the Rambam brings down, as I recall in Igeret HaTeiman, that if you take certain psukim out of context, you can get completely the opposite meaning that was intended. So we say every day the pasuk "Ve'avadtem Elohim acherim," which you could understand to literally mean "you shall worship other gods." It sounds like it's a mitzvah that you have to worship other gods. Clearly, that's not the meaning. And how do I know that's not the meaning? Because I have a lot of other proofs from the Torah and from Nach that we're not allowed to worship other gods. So clearly, V'avadtem Elohim acherim can't mean that. So it doesn't mean that when I say infinite, I don't mean that every possible interpretation is a legitimate interpretation. But it could be that there's an infinite number of interpretations that are completely legitimate.
I guess this is sort of like a bit of the paradox of a line. A line can be infinitely long, but some things are on the line and some things are not on the line. So you can have both infinity and an infinity of things. You can have an infinity of things that are on the line and an infinity of things that are not on the line. That makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah.
So it's so some sense it's sort of a limitlessness, which sounds like a paradox, and maybe it is a paradox, but
So actually, the way I've always thought of it is not a line. You could the example of a line is also a reasonable example. I have always thought of it as an infinite tube, right? Which is a delimited space because it's a tube, but the tube itself is goes on infinitely. So understand it how you will, but one of the reasons, again, this is so important. Maybe I'll just say one more thing about this because it's something I do think about a lot. Um, the, to the extent that I have, examined some aspects of biblical criticism, um, part of what biblical criticism attempts to do is to try to understand the words as they would have been understood at the time of writing. Now, set aside, in a sense, this is an impossible task because we don't really know, but it doesn't mean it's an unworthy task. It doesn't mean that we can't know anything. What do I mean you can't really know? There are a lot of reasons. If you think about the way we understand language just in our own daily lives, uh, we know that language shifts in our own lifetimes. None of us are so young that we haven't seen meanings of words shift in our own lifetime. And so to say, I'm going to go back 2,500 years or 3,000 years and say what a word means, I can bring a lot of different proof to bear, but I'll never really know. But nonetheless, it's an enlightening exercise to try to figure that out. And it's to be commended. Certainly, this is something that not only biblical critics do, but Chazal did this, and the Mefarshim did it. Biblical critics also do it. and so on and so forth. The difference, though, in terms of what we're speaking about, is that that's an important understanding that we should try to reach. But by the same token, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only way that we should understand the Torah. The fact that the Torah is given to us for all time means that we need to do our best to, yes, understand what its original meaning is, and at the same time to integrate it into whatever meaning the meaning that we have that it has for us today. So maybe that's the topic of another longer shiur. But there's a certain dynamism that's built into the way Chazal understand the Torah, which arguably is in the Torah itself, right? The Torah, because the Torah itself talks about in many places the idea that it's going to be handed down to future generations and taught to future generations, and your children are going to ask you, and so on and so forth. And so it behooves us to do our best to understand it in whatever way we can understand it. And if we end up understanding something or saying something that we haven't found that somebody else said before us, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not part of the Torah. It could be that it's part and parcel of the Torah. It could be that that was part of what was embedded in the Torah that comes out to us now through our efforts of study. Okay, so I spent another long time talking about this. Before I go, now we really are going to go ahead in the Gemara and Yoma. And before I do, if anybody else wants to say anything more about this now, speak now. You don't have to forever hold your peace, but if you want to say something now is the time.
So would it be going too far to say that, in some sense, the point of historical context is to shed, I mean, rather than, I mean, in addition to the text shedding light on the historical context, it may be that the point of historical context is to bring out what was always implicit in the text.
Yeah, again, I personally, not that I, the judge, but on a personal level, I think all of that effort is very well used, right? Like when scholars started to learn Akkadian and Ugaritic, and they also started to see other kinds of ancient texts and styles of ancient texts and ancient poetry, it really did help to give insight into understanding the Torah, including right now in our day and age. I will contrast that with a concept that I think I have mentioned this in the past, and I've since looked for this article unsuccessfully, but I haven't made a huge effort to find it. But there was an article in Tradition magazine from about maybe 40 or 50 years ago by a person who was the student of the Baal Otzar HaGaonim, that was put together by Dr. Rabbi Levine. This is the Otzar HaGaonim. This was a collection of Perushim and Shuvot from the Gaonim, many of which had been referenced by Rishonim. I'll put it this way: a lot of the literature of the Gaonim had been lost in its original form, but a lot of it is cited by later Rishonim who had it. And then after the Cairo Geniza was uncovered, some of this Gaonic literature started to also come out and then be published. So there was a fellow whose name I do not remember at all, who was a student of Rabbi Levine, who put together the Otzar HaGaonim, which is a it's an encyclopedic work. It's on all of Shas, on virtually all of Shas. And he was also a student of the Chazon Ish. And he related in this essay that Rabbi Levine was saddened or upset. I don't remember the word he used. He thought that when he would publish Otzar HaGaonim and knew certain things that had been lost for so many generations would now be published again, and they could be used for halacha l'maaseh. They could be used for practical halacha. I think he was thinking about particularly certain things in Hilchot Ketubah, certain things that had to do with that. And he was sad that like poskim didn't jump on it as a source. And when he brought this up, when the student brought this up to the Chazon Ish basically replied that there's a reason that things ended up in the Geniza. That is, they felt, there's certain things that were not meant to be passed down. I'm probably oversimplifying, and I read this article a long time ago, but there is this tension even now. I mean, I don't have to, you can see it now between different attitudes in psak. To what degree will I rely on certain earlier opinions or certain later opinions, and how do I use that? So the problem is I have a lot more to say about it, and I think I should stop for now. Let's go back to the Gemara, and let's continue in our limudim. Okay, so we're up now to this part of the Gemara here, Shotem elo lugmav. So we know that one who drinks cheekful on Yom Kippurim is chayav. So this is where we're going to discuss this in detail. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, Lo Malo Lugmav Mamash. It's not literally the fill of his cheeks, right? It's Lugmav is his cheeks, it's plural. Ela Kol She'ilu Yisalkenu Letzad Echad. Rather, it means any of it or all of it that can be pushed to one side, in other words, into one cheek. And it'll look like the fullness of his cheeks. In other words, on one side, it's going to look like it's a full cheek, like that. Okay, so that's his interpretation. This is Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. So the Gemara challenges this. Meisiva. Gemara brings a Braita to challenge this. And the Braita says, Kami yishteh v'yehei chayav. How much does one have to drink in order to be chayav? Meaning, how much does one have to drink when in order to be chayav what?
I mean, how much does one need to drink on Yom Kippur in order to be chayav on it?
Very good. Beit Shammai omrim revi'it. So Beit Shammai says you have to drink a revi'it, which is a revi'it tahin. Rabbi Yehuda, Beit Hillel omrim mulo lugmav. So Beit Shammai gives a fixed amount, a revi'it, which, if you're wondering how much a revi'it is, of course, like everything else, there's machloket about this. 1 second. But just so that we have some numbers in our head. Wait a second. I had this lined up. Just a sec. Nope, not there. Sorry. There we go. These are shiurim that we can relate to. So for the purpose of this discussion, we're going to use the shiurim according to the Rambam, which are essentially the minimal shiurim. So one revi'it would be 76.4 cc's, cubic centimeters. Okay. Tom Sofer says it's almost 3 times as much, but we're not going to go. That's another whole discussion. But let's say so that's a revi'it. But the point is, it's a fixed amount, right? That's the point of Beit Shammai, and whereas Beit Hillel says Melo Lugmav, his cheeks, the fill of his cheeks. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishun Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yehuda says, in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, Kim Lo Lugmav, like the fill of his cheeks. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira Omer, Kidei Gemiya, enough to the amount that you swallow. Kidei Gemiya, enough to swallow, let's say, for a quaff. Although quaff might be a larger amount or short, it's hard to say. But in any event, we're going to leave Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira because A, we don't paskin like him, and B, it's the most difficult one to pinpoint. But the other ones are the ones that are going to be important to us. So let's just review this quickly. Remember, right before we bring the Braita, we have this statement in the name of Shmuel that when our Mishnah says Melo Lugmav, it doesn't really mean the fill of his cheeks. It means Kimelo Lugmav, like the fill of his cheeks, which means that you take the liquid and push it all to one side of your mouth so that your cheek bulges out. Now I have this Braita, and there's a machloket about how much one needs to drink on Yom Kippur in order to be chayav in onesh. Beit Shammai says a revi'it, so again, that's a fixed amount. Whatever we think a revi'it is, that's what Beit Shammai is saying. Beit Hillel says melo lugmav, the fill of his cheeks. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Yezer, kimelo lugmav, like the fill of his cheeks. What's the difference between Beit Hillel and Rabbi Yehuda Mishum Rabbi Eliezer?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the line again, please?
So Beit Shammai said, how much does one drink in order to be chayav on Yom Kippur? Beit Shammai says a revi'it. Beit Hillel says melo lugmav, the fill of his cheeks. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, kimelo lugmav, like the fill of his cheeks. What's the difference between melo lugmav and kimelo lugmav? What's the difference?
Well,
You don't
when
have
when you have a cheek full, yes, you drink the water you have in your cheek. But if it's logmav, so you measure how much you can put in your cheek, and you can drink it from a glass.
Well, wait a second. What did we say before? In other words, basically, we've defined these terms already.
So
What did Rabbi Yehuda say in the name of Shmuel?
kilo lugmav would be just what you can push over to one side.
And what's melo lugmav?
Full cheek full. I mean,
It's cheeks full. It's both
cheeks full. Right, it's plural. Yeah.
Okay. So here, what does Beit Hillel hold? He holds melo lugmav, which would be both cheeks. Kimlo lugmav, which is Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Yezer, he says that's kimlo. He holds kimlo lugmav, which would be one whole cheekful. So that's their machloket. Why is this Braita a kasha? It says meitive. We're bringing it as a kasha on what Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, where Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, when the Mishnah says Melo Lugmav, it really means Kimlo Lugmav, right? That's the Kitzur, that's what he's saying. Why is this Braita a kasha on Shmuel?
I mean, what I'm going to say is just a guess that Hillel's the more authoritative source.
Oh, no, it's a very good guess.
We darshan like Rabbi Hillel.
Not just you don't mean darshan, you mean we paskin.
Paskin. I meant paskin. Yes,
that's what you meant, right?
Yes,
I understand.
Yes,
right. Very good. And in fact, Rashi already clues us into this from the beginning. It says Kama Yishtem. Michael, we lost you for just a minute, but I don't think you missed too much.
Except my brilliant insight.
Yeah. I didn't mean to downplay your comment. Kama Yishte, right? So from the very beginning of the Braita, Rashi says, he clues us in, Mi de Beit Hillel kaparit. It's asking the question, it's asking the kasha from Beit Hillel. So the kasha is because, and why is the kasha going to be from Beit Hillel? Because of what Michael Werner told us, because we're going to paskin like Beit Hillel. So how can it be that Shmuel is going to interpret our Mishnah to mean Kimlo Lugmav? It said our Mishnah says Milo Lugmav, and he says it really means Kimlo Lugmav. But how can he say that in light of the fact that we know that Beit Hillel himself says Milo Lugmav? So the Gemara says, Mi adifa mi matnitin, dokim na kedei sheyireh, achinami kedei sheyireh. Is this preferable, or is this stronger somehow than our Mishnah that we have already established means that Melo Lugmav means to make it so that you can see? In other words, that you push it all to one side. Achinami. So here also, when Beit Hillel says Melo Lugmav, he means Kedei Shireh. It's not really both cheeks full, it's that you see it on one side. What's the problem with that answer? In other words, their answer is, look, you changed the understanding of the Mishnah. Mishnah says Melo Lugmav. You said it really means Kimlo Lugmav. I could say the same thing about Beit Hillel. It says Melo Lugmav. And he really means Kimlo Lugmav. What's the problem with that answer?
Why didn't he say Kolomik?
No, what's the problem with his answer? Because by the way, that's a decent question, which we could already ask on the Mishnah. But why is it problematic in this particular context?
I mean, if he actually agrees, then why?
You're thinking too hard.
Okay, that's it's a problem. It's a syndrome of mine. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to go through this again before the Gemara answers it, so you can answer it yourself one more time. So we have as follows: we have our Mishnah that says "L'shotem lo lugmav." We have Shmuel who explains what it really means is Kim lo lugmav. Okay, the Gemara then challenges it from this Mishnah. Mishnah says, how much do we drink in order to be chayav? So Beit Shammai says, Revi'it, we'll set him aside. Beit Hillel says, Milo lugmav. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Yezer, Kim lo lugmav. So if I say that Beit Hillel really means Kim lo lugmav, what's my problem?
You don't need that, the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, Omer B'Shum Rabbi Eliezer.
Right. In other words, then there would be no machloket between Beit Hillel and Rabbi Yehuda Mishum Rabbi Eliezer. But there is a machloket between them. So I understand that they don't believe that it means the same thing. So that's what, right. So the Gemara says, Ihachi Hainu Rabbi Eliezer. If your answer that is that Beit Hillel really means Kimlo Lugmav, if that's true, Ihachi, if that's so, Hainu Rabbi Eliezer, then he's saying the same thing as Rabbi Eliezer. And what's the problem with that? Then there's no machloket, but the Breita records a machloket, so there must have been a machloket. So the Gemara says, no, actually there's still going to be, even if I say that Beit Hillel says Melo Lugmav and it really means Kimlo Lugmav, there's still a difference between them. Ika Beinayu Melo Lugmav Dachuk. There'll be a difference between them about exactly what we mean by Melo Lugmav. And that's why Beit Hillel is going to use the term Melo Lugmav, and Rabbi Eliezer uses the term Kimlo Lugmav. So the difference between them is going to be a pressed cheekful. Literally dachuk, right? It's a pressed cheekful. And Rashi here says, this is Rashi's gear, so that we have that what? Leveit Hillel ba'inan kadeshi salkenu litzad echad. According to Beit Hillel, what that means is, what Kimlo Lugmav means is to push the liquid all to one side. The Yireh Kimlo Lugmav bereva. It's going to look like an expanded cheekful, the full cheekful. Rabbi Eliezer Kimlo Lugmav dachuk. It's going to be pressed. In other words, the difference is going to be, as best as I can do this on video, is to do, like, according to Beit Hillel, is to push it out to one side. And according to Rabbi Eliezer, it would be enough just to put some liquid on that side, but not that you have to push it all the way out. That will be the difference between them. So at this point, what's important for us is we have maintained this contention of Shmuel that when our Mishnah says Hashotem lo lugmav, it means kimlo lugmav, and kimlo lugmav is going to be when you push the liquid to one side enough to make your cheek bulge out as much as possible. Unlike Rabbi Eliezer, who right away says kimlo lugmav, and what he means is somewhat. It's a pressed in cheek, but one cheekful. Or maybe both cheekfuls, but it's pressed in. So yeah, okay. But that's what the Gemara is that's the Gemara's contention at this moment. Matkifla Rav Hoshia. So Rav Hoshia attacks this. He says, Im came. If that's true, if what you are saying now is true, that Melo Lugmav means Kimlo Lugmav, and it means the expanded cheekful, and that's also the psak of Beit Hillel. Havele mekule Beit Shammai umechumrei Beit Hillel. If that's true, then this would be a kula, a leniency of Beit Shammai, and a stringency of Beit Hillel. Why would that be? What did Beit Shammai say? How much did Beit Shammai say you have to drink?
A reviate.
A reviate. Beit Hillel now says this very full cheekful. So which is bigger, a reviate or a cheekful?
Revi'it.
Revi'it is bigger. So why is that now? Why is that a kula? for
Because
Beit
because
Shammai?
basically you have to drink much far more in order to get in order to be chayav a onus.
You have to drink more. Maybe not far more, but you have to drink more. So it means that Beit Shammai is actually makil. He's saying, no, if you drink a cheekful, like Beit Hillel, you're still not chayiv. You have to drink a whole revi'it. So what's Rav Hoshia's kasha? His kasha is, if what you're saying is true, that according to Beit Hillel, Kimlo Lugmav means this expanded cheekful, that's less than revi'it, and then what you're saying is that, and we want to hold halach, we generally hold halachas like Beit Hillel over Beit Shammai, but it comes out that this will be a chumrah of Beit Hillel umat Beit Shammai. Why is that a problem? So it's a chumrah of Beit Hillel over Beit Shammai. So what?
It's usually Beit Hillel. Usually it's the reverse. Usually
You're right. Usually
yeah.
it's the verse, but so what? Okay, we mentioned this before, but it's okay. There's a Mishnah in Ediot, which I should show you. But hold on, I'll show you in a second. There's a Mishnah in Ediot that lists the Chumrei Beit Hillel and the Lumat, the Kulei Beit Shammai. And this isn't listed there. That's the problem. If what you're saying is true, then the Mishnah Ediot should have listed this machloket between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai as one of the machlokot, which is Michumrei Beit Hillel u'Mikulei Beit Shammai, and it doesn't, which implies that maybe you're learning this all wrong. Maybe you don't understand Beit Hillel properly at all, because you're saying that he's coming out with a shear that's less than Beit Shammai. So the Gemara says, Gemara says, Amar Le, he says to him, Ki atshil v'og melech habashan atshil, v'havu le Beit Shammai l'chumra. So when I was asking about Og, the king of Bashan. What do we know about Og, the king of Bashan?
He was a giant.
He was a giant. So how big was his cheekful? So we
Very
don't know, but yes, the point is very big. In other words, his cheekful would be more than a revi'it. So what does it mean? That when Beit Shammai, when Beit Hillel says Kimlo Lugmav, and we understand that to mean a cheekful, it's not necessarily a chumrah of Beit Hillel, because maybe we're talking about a giant. So, and this is one of the things that's interesting about the way the Gemara dissects this machloket, is exactly this point that I started off in the beginning with that Breita, that there's a difference between the way Beit Shammai presents and Beit Hillel presents. Beit Shammai presents with a fixed shear, and Beit Hillel is presenting us with a variable shear, right? It's a relative shear. And we see, and that's the way the Mishnah presents. The Mishnah is going, presumably according to Beit Hillel. So, let's finish off now, because it's getting late. Let's finish off just with this last Rashi, and then we'll continue this next time. So, Matkif Rav Hoshia im kain, if it's so, if it's so that Beit Hillel says one is chayav with the amount that you can push to one side of, to one cheek, Then Havale Batsir me Revi'it, that will be less than a Revi'it. Vahavyala Mikule Beit Shammai, and then it would be then in contrast to Beit Shammai, who says a Revi'it, Beit Shammai will now be the Mekil Hosek. V'litniye v'masechet Eduyot gabe Kule Beit Shammai. Then it should have been learned in the Mishnah of Eduyot with the other leniencies of Beit Shammai, Shekulan Shnuyat Sham, that all of them are learned there. So basically the way we learn. Okay, so just next week we'll continue this sugya where the Gemara continues to challenge this. And so we haven't quite finished this part of the sugya, but what we have so far is the idea that when the Mishnah says Ashotem lo lugmav, it means kim lo lugmav, which means the amount that you push to one cheek, the amount of liquid you can push to one cheek. And the implication is for an average person, that will be less than a revi'it. But for a very big person, it could be more than a revi'it. So that's why it's not listed in the list of Kumrei Beit Hillel and Kumrei Beit Shammai. That's it for now. So, okay. Any last words? Okay. Thank you, everybody. And have a good week. Good Shabbos. See you next week.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Lato. Bye-bye.